Good evening, everybody. It's April 7, 2025. I hope everybody's doing well this evening. I'm going to continue with part 3 of the affidavit testimony of Karen Romero, also known as Goodness 8 on a lot of the conference calls. She is writing this affidavit to Karen Stewart, the retired NSA intelligence analyst. They were friends. I was friends with both Karens, and Karen gave me a copy of this affidavit testimony back in 2018. And unfortunately, she passed away in October of 2024. She had a series of auto accidents, which I believe were part of this disgusting program. Karen was a nurse. She was an ethical nurse, upstanding person, always told the truth, didn't lie, brutally honest, and a Scorpio. So here we go. I'm starting with, let's see, this is part 3, page 22. My unemployment checks were stopped many times, and this was before unemployment ran out. I would call them and get the worst people on the phone. Either they would hang up on me or not speak to me. They just quit paying me and had no legal right to do so. I kept applying for jobs to no avail. I was running out of money for gas for my car. Now I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, where it is a higher elevation. I think it is winter 2010, but without going through my piles of documentation, I am not really sure on this time period. Winter has arrived. I was out of food. I was literally out of money, and I was nearly faint from not eating. I found a place that I could apply for food stamps and almost fainted while there. They actually gave me the food stamps after taking one look at me and knowing I was telling the absolute truth. They suggested I go to St. Mary's Food Bank and I could get actual food to eat. I did. It was across town. I cried the whole way there, wondering how people paid for gas for their car without money. I found out some walked. I was horrified that this is happening in our country. The woman at the food bank gave me a full cart of food, but most of it had to be refrigerated. I gave her back about 1/4 of the food, saying I did not have a refrigerator. Before walking out the door, I chugged down a half a bottle of orange juice. Because I had not eaten, I thought I was going to throw up the orange juice. Thankfully, I was able to hold it down. I decided to eat some bread and was able to hold that down. I thank God I now had food and food stamps. I stopped at the park where more homeless people were and gave away what food I could not use. It is now really cold, even though it is Arizona. It dropped down to 17 degrees one night. And since I had only a few gallons of gas in my car, I could not waste gas and use the heater. I had 3 little cheap fleece throw blankets, and it was so cold. So I had no money, about out of gas, but I did have food stamps. I had never been on government assistance of any kind before this. A stigma and shame came over me. However, this was not my shame. This shame belonged to the FBI. You hear that, guys? Who she's blaming? Karen Romero is blaming the FBI. Most of my money had gone to my health insurance, car insurance, disability insurance, and a few leftover miscellaneous bills. I also spent money that I had on gas, motels when I could not afford one, truck stop showers when I couldn't afford a motel, and car upkeep. Thank God my car was paid for. My car became my home. When you're on food stamps, the politicians pass a federal law where you cannot use them for hot food of any kind. It was so cold, and I wanted hot food so much. No money and no hot food for me. I had no stove or refrigerator, so it was a bit hard to buy stuff with food stamps that would be decent food. I was staying in my car at this truck stop for several days, wondering how to get gas money. It was connected to McDonald's. I wanted a cup of hot coffee so bad. I did find enough change I had in my car for a cup of coffee. I felt like I hit the lottery. This guy comes out of McDonald's as if I was as I was walking in to go to the bathroom, and I could smell hamburgers in his bag he was carrying. I walked up to him, and I said to him, I have never had to do this, but here it goes. I told him I was out of work, looking for work, and so hungry for hot food. I told him I had enough change to buy a cup of coffee, and I asked him if he would be so kind as to give me $1 to buy a hamburger. Well, Karen, I think Jesus Christ himself showed up in that minute, because the guy said, sure, and handed me $1. I had just enough for the burger and coffee and felt the sun was shining down on me again. I nearly cried when he gave me the money. I was so grateful. I came out of McDonald's with a hamburger in a bag and my coffee, and I saw him sitting in his truck eating his hamburgers. I walked over to his truck and showed him that I had indeed bought a hamburger. He said he didn't doubt that I would buy a hamburger. I genuinely thanked him. I introduced myself, and he said his name is Larry. I told him I was not a homeless person that was alcoholic or drug addict, but was now in a homeless situation. I told him that I am an RN that was a whistleblower, that I had gone to the FBI and suffered enormous abuse after going to the FBI. I told him I was being experimented on with some kind of illegal programming, and many others were having this done to them also. I told him some are not even aware this is being done. I told him a lot as we ate our hamburgers. This guy believed every word I said. He was so concerned. He was the best listener I have ever encountered. The wonderful thing is, he wasn't FBI. This really was a random occurrence. After I was all done telling him in a summary of what happened to me, he looked at me and he said with great concern, as if this may be happening to him also, quote, "Are you telling me we are being experimented on?" Unquote. I said, "Yes, Larry, that is what I'm telling you." He said, "Oh my God." I told him I didn't want to take up any more of his time and thanked him again. I started to leave and he said, "Wait." I did, and he pulled out 2 $20 bills out of his wallet and said that he and his wife are Christians, and he wanted me to have that money. I almost declined because I'm so used to taking care of myself, but he insisted. So with tears in my eyes, I took the money he gave me and thanked him profusely. I walked over to my car, got in, put my head on the steering wheel, and cried a large gratitude of tears. I may not have gotten a job yet, but I had met one of the finest people on this earth. I was at absolute awe over how kind he was. Thanks to Larry, I now had a full tank of gas and started looking for a job again in that area. I was still sleeping in my car at the same truck stop. I spent my days at the library and sometimes hand-delivered resumes to places. However, most places you tell the same thing. They tell you the same thing. Apply only online. I had been doing that also. Each day at the library, I tried to apply online for jobs for a few hours. Then I would do research about what the hell was going on in our country. So after a few weeks, I was running low on gas again. It started to get even colder at night. Mind you, I was still being targeted with gang stalkers and slander. I knew remote neural monitoring was being used on me also. I found out a lot on the SNA website. Your old stomping grounds. Again, she's talking to Karen Stewart. I think I read more policies on the FBI website than the stupid agents have. I spent a lot of time doing research. However, I was not aware of any shielding techniques, nor was I aware of any TI groups at that time. The library always closed at 9 p.m., so back out into the cold again. I was being very cautious about turning the car on to use the heater if I wasn't going anywhere. I dressed in many layers, and at this time I looked kind of like how some homeless people look. I didn't care if my clothes were mismatched or not. I was cold. It wasn't below 0 yet, but sometimes in the single digits. I always tried to stay clean. If I could not shower, I cleaned up at the sink in the truck stop bathroom along with homeless moms washing their babies. I longed for my house. I used to have in Las Vegas. I longed for my marriage even though he had an affair. I longed for a job again. I cried, I prayed, I shivered from the cold. One night at 9 p.m. I was walking out of the library, and this guy who had been sleeping outside in the park was shivering and told the guard at the library he could not leave the library this night because if he did, he would freeze to death. The guard told him he would have to leave. I then started to feel guilty. I thought, if I was a decent enough person, I would have him at least sit in my car. Even though no heat could be used in my car either, but I intuitively felt this was not safe to do, so I didn't. I got in my car and started my car. I now see the guy walking towards a bridge that is over this ditch in the adjacent park. He stops to climb up on the railing. It wasn't that high, but sometimes short jumps can cause further damage. I looked and saw he was planning to jump. I quickly got out of the car and saw the guard and another guy outside in front of the library. I told him that guy's going to jump and I'm not strong enough to stop him. They ran over to him. Now he's at the top of the railing. They're both trying to hold him down. I don't know how the end of that story because I left. I couldn't stand it anymore. He may have jumped, and I may have blocked it out of my mind. It was such a horrible thing to see him on top of that railing, also knowing he had been sleeping outside, freezing at night. So as I'm driving back to the truck stop to sleep for the night, I yelled at Jesus. I yelled at the military. I yelled at all the politicians. I yelled at the elite. I heard sirens coming towards the library on my way out, and I was yelling and screaming in my car. I have never been this angry about so many injustices. I was out of money again. So early one morning, I made a cardboard sign and stood where I had been seeing others holding up a cardboard sign. There were so many homeless people in Flagstaff. The parking lot where I stayed was filled with homeless people, some with children, really heartbreaking. I had finally found a place with free showers at the Goodwill, so that saved me $10 a pop, which was the cost of a shower at the truck stop. It may not sound like much, but when you are dirt poor, this is a lot of money. So I was freezing cold morning, and I stood out with my cardboard sign. No one stopped except for these two military guys. I naively thought, good, they will be kind. Not so. One opened his window. Both started laughing at me and yelled, "Get a job!" I hated them. How smug and arrogant. You're not required to give homeless people money, although I do. But to be that mean-spirited to someone in need is unfathomable to me. There were a lot of military in Flagstaff. One afternoon I was sitting in the same McDonald's. This military guy made such an ugly, lewd comment about a female walking by. It is too disgusting to tell you what he said. I gave him a look like, "I cannot believe you said that." He said, "What?" I said, "That was a really lewd comment that you said, loud enough for her to hear, her children to hear, and myself as well." He puts a smirk on his face and said to me, "I think you might want to thank me for giving you your freedom." I wanted to pop him one. I said to him, "You did not give me my freedom. You are arrogant, and do not speak to me again." He started opening his mouth, and I left. I thought somehow I got to where it's warmer. I thought I would go to the Catholic Church and see if they would give me enough money for a tank of gas so I could make it to Kingman, Arizona, where it's warmer. At least I would not freeze to death. By the way, the homeless shelters were for mothers with children. They were full too, so by the grace of God, I found a place that was a Catholic charity center, but they were closed. I drove there and truly was out of gas. I parked there in their lot for the night, and I waited until the morning to see if I could get some help. They didn't open until afternoon. There was a guy and a woman that gave out gas vouchers. I told them if they could give me enough money for a tank of gas to get to Kingman so I didn't freeze to death, I would return the money to them when I got unemployment money straightened out. The woman was a real bitch. Wanted to know if I had looked for work. I attempted to give her a summary of my saga. The guy was very empathetic and kind. She looks at me and says in a nasty way, "I just can't believe an RN can't find work." I don't even think she believed I was an RN. He believed me. And he was the one that made a final decision on things. Thank God he gave me a voucher for gas at a nearby gas station for a full tank of gas. He told me not to send back the money. He knew I would. He said, "Please don't do that. Pass it on. Or perhaps you already have." I shall never forget his words. What a nice thing to say, since I have helped others before. I also knew I would continue to do that, and I didn't send back the money like he asked me. I got to Kingman. It was warmer. I slept in my car at the Walmart parking lot, or the truck stop, or McDonald's. I actually had a variety of sleeping places in Kingman. Again, finding a place to park your car at night is one of the hardest things about being homeless, but I told myself to be grateful because I had a car to sleep in, and many others did not. There were even more homeless people in Kingman. Every corner, someone was holding up a cardboard sign. Still no jobs, still no unemployment deposits. I knew the FBI was interfering with me receiving them. I'll just repeat that. Karen says, I knew the FBI was interfering in me receiving them. I was in Kingman, Arizona now for about a week, and my gas needle again is on very low. Real bad at this time because car insurance is now due. I couldn't drive without car insurance. I know people do, but just because I was homeless did not mean I would compromise my morals, values, and ethics. Besides, to do so is to become like the FBI. I wasn't willing to become like who I most hated. I did have a few days grace period on the car insurance. Again, by the grace of God, I had found a lawyer that did pro bono work before I had used up all my car insurance. I told the lawyer what happened, and he wrote a letter to the Pennsylvania Unemployment. He said he hoped it would work because what they were doing is illegal. Personally, I think the FBI took control of my unemployment. They think they could do anything with their Patriot Act, which is really null and void. Now look at them. They are truly ruined. Worse will come out about them. Now, mind you, this is written in 2018. I guess she predicted the future. A few days after I saw the lawyer, I started receiving my unemployment again. Thank God. I was now able to pay my car insurance. It was getting harder and harder to pay my disability insurance and my COBRA health insurance. Eventually, I had to quit paying on the disability and health insurance. That was around 2012 that I had to do this due to the fact that the unemployment had run out. I had run through all my 401k money too. I didn't have much in that 401k anyway. It was from the job where I encountered the FBI RN Yvonne. Thankfully, I have another retirement fund that I cannot start drawing on until I'm 65. I stayed in Arizona through the winter. Nothing much changed. One interview I actually got was at a surgery center in Kingman, Arizona. I had high hopes for this. I desperately needed a job, not only for financial reasons, but for psychological reasons as well. I am the type of person that derives satisfaction from working. I am also the type that likes to make a difference. I know this sounds idealistic, but I like to turn something bad into something good. I like to make at least a little bit of a difference, to make our world a better place. It makes me feel good, like I'm doing something nice for Jesus. It is my way of saying thank you to him. It was so depressing in Kingman, Arizona. Most of the population there was homeless. The library was very old and had film on the walls, like a biofilm of sorts. It reminded me of that book 1984. There was a part in that book that talked about the walls being dingy with some kind of film on them. I thought at the time, oh my God, this whole country is becoming like that book. It even was cold in Kingman, but not as cold as Flagstaff. One night in Walmart parking lot, where all the homeless were spending the night in their cars, a truck driver who drove for Walmart pulled up near my car. He came over and knocked on my window. I rolled down my window, and he said he noticed that I had a thin blanket. Although I had 3 actual throws that were now threadbare. He said he had just bought a new warm Sherpa blanket inside the store and wanted to give it to me. I thanked him, but I told him he should use the blanket he bought. It was cold out. He asked me if I had food. I told him I was okay. He goes to his truck and gets a bag of food together for me and brings it back. I did take the food and really thanked him. He said his name was Ross. He asked if I had money. At that time, again, I was waiting for another deposit. Most of would be spent on monthly bills. He handed me a $20 bill and said it was all he had, but he wanted me to have it. I said, no, that isn't right. He insisted I took it. I did get his phone number, and I cannot find that in my pile of documentation that now sits in a storage unit. One day I will find it and call him. I would love to be able to tell him what a difference his kindness meant to me and also repay him. So another month passed, and I'm low on money again. I do not have money to wash clothes, and all my clothes are dirty now. I'm sitting in the park wondering how to get money to wash my clothes. This pig of a stalker and pig of a wife came to the park to stalk me. They took a cooler to a picnic table, sat down, and never opened the cooler. They sat for 2 minutes, got up to leave. As they walked to their vehicle, I asked them if they would be so kind to give me enough money to wash clothes, as I had no clean clothes. I knew they would say no, and to great satisfaction in doing so. Why? Because they were nothing but low-life stalkers that harm people. I simply wanted to see if they were so dehumanized that they wouldn't at least feel some empathy. I assure you, the 2 dirtbags had no empathy. Karen, they were probably saving up to buy that big screen TV. I get such a kick out of when you say that about stalkers. Kingman had a shelter that was full and was only for women with children. By the way, I never had kids. And being in the situation I was in, I was darn good thing. There was a man's shelter, and that housed only about 8 men. Many homeless men slept outside in their cars, if they were fortunate enough to have one. The good thing about that men's shelter is they allowed women to use one of their bathrooms during the day that had a shower. I was also so thankful for this. It was always so clean, and I didn't have to pay to use the shower. Some people would make deals with their food stamps so they could have a little cash to buy gas. But I'm simply not that kind of person, so that wasn't an option for me. Even though I was in dire need, it didn't mean I was going to compromise my good values and morals. So, to do so would then become like the FBI. Setting them aside, I still would not do it. Perhaps if I was starving to death, then maybe. But I wasn't starving because I did have food stamps. The criminals at the FBI hate somebody like me. How good I am reminds them frequently of what scum they are. I truly do not think one of their dirtbag agents could have survived in the way in which I have. They would break the law and steal. They have already shown our country this is how they are, and we the people have allowed this aberrant behavior. They attempt to steal people's reputation. They attempt to steal people's souls. They steal people's personal property. They steal people's money, and they do this all in the most egregious of ways. I had lost track of my dad. I felt something might be wrong with him. I came to find out he had moved out of Las Vegas after I left Las Vegas and had moved back to Arizona. So I tried to find my dad in Arizona. I had no forwarding address for him. I went to a sports bar in Arizona he used to go to, hoping to find him there. I called his sister from a payphone at a rest stop. She said he was put in assisted living, and he now had Alzheimer's, yet another blow to me. She did have an address for him. It was a private home that this Romanian woman ran. She had 5 or 6 patients. It was bittersweet seeing my dad. Happy that I found him, but he didn't look well and had trouble with his mind. It was so sad. I had only a few bucks left prior to going to private assisted living address. I stopped and spent that money I had on a root beer float, a newspaper, and a pack of those little white Hostess donuts for my dad. Those were 3 of his favorite things. He could not concentrate on reading the paper due to his mind. However, he was so happy that I brought him a root beer float and the little donuts. I cry as I type this, thinking back to this time. The woman that ran the place was an ogre. She said, "You should not have brought him a paper. We have newspapers here." I said, "But this newspaper is from me." One night I was over visiting hours by 5 minutes with permission from her husband, who had said that was fine. The Romanian woman goes off on me, grabs my arm, twists my arm, and tells me to get out. Obviously, she was a minion for the criminals at the FBI. This is a woman that isn't a U.S. citizen taking tax money for her business that she didn't run in a way that I would run one. Perhaps she didn't realize here in America it's still illegal to assault someone. Thank God she did not do this in front of my dad. I left Arizona after that trauma-intended base assault was done on me. I drove to California to look for what else? A job. I drove up and down the state of California. No job offers, let alone an interview. I ran out of money in California and again almost ran out of gas. I was stuck again at a rest stop. A young Hispanic girl asked her dad to give me money so I could go see my dad again. I had a cardboard sign at the rest stop explaining this. Unbeknownst to me, she had read the sign. At the House of Romania, it turns out that my dad had slipped on ice and broke his hip. He was now in the hospital. The young girl's father gave her $25 to give to me for gas. I was so grateful. Furthermore, I had hope again for young people. So I left California and drove again to Arizona. While at the hospital to visit my dad, that Romanian ogre was in his hospital room. I told the hospital I am my dad's daughter and did not want her there. She left. At first, my dad was in ICU and non-responsive, except when I told him to squeeze my hand if he knew who I was. He did, which surprised me because he was in a coma. He wasn't doing well, and I called a priest for him to have last rites, since he would have wanted that. Some Hispanic woman in the waiting room had seen me there for a few days. I love most Hispanic women, not just because I'm half Mexican, but because they usually pray a lot. These women had a family member in ICU also. They asked me if I would like us all to get together and pray over my dad. I very much wanted to do this, especially knowing 2 or more who pray together is quite powerful. So we all went to my dad's room and prayed over him. Miraculously, my dad made a turnaround. Here he had been given his last rites and he pulled out of a coma and started to get better. He was finally able to go to a hospital floor instead of ICU. While he was in the hospital, I was sleeping in my car there in the parking lot, ducked down so the little RoboCop security guards didn't throw me out. After this, a short time later, my dad was discharged to an actual nursing home, something I never wanted to happen to him, but I had no home, and there was no way I was in a position to take care of him. He started out his life in a horrible way, and would probably end his life in a horrible way, confined to a nursing home. When he was 2 years old, his mom and dad got into a huge fight and left their children abandoned, each thinking the other would go back to the children. Neither did. My dad, I should say my uncle, his brother was 8. My aunt, his sister, was 6. My dad was 2. And my other aunt, his other sister, was 9 months old. All abandoned in a house that was rented. My uncle was stealing milk for the baby off of people's porches, and one of my neighbors called the police. They came and got the children. My uncle and one aunt went to live with their grandmother. My other aunt, the baby at the time, was put in foster care, and sadly, my dad was put in a Catholic monastery where at one time he told me terrible things happened to them there. He did not go into detail, but I'm sure with the history of among the Catholic priests, that is probably the abuse he suffered. My dad, God rest his soul, died in 2013, and he had prepaid his funeral years before. The funeral home was corrupt and tried to charge again, saying he didn't prepay. But I had the paperwork saying otherwise. Do you think it did any good? No, it didn't. I didn't have money to pay them, so my aunt did, but not enough for him to have a funeral. I was so tired at this point, seeing so much corruption, and did nothing. Nothing's being done about it. I still do not know what happened to my dad's belongings and his fairly new car. I know my aunt didn't have his stuff. I wouldn't put it past either the state of Arizona or the Romanian thug stole his stuff. I called the public comment line in the corrupt U.S. DOJ many times and told them that it was an injustice to steal from people that have passed away. I told them that my dad wanted me to have a few special, non-expensive things, and I would like to know what happened to his stuff. I got targeted more after this by both the corrupt DOJ and the corrupt FBI. No big surprise. I believe I also complained about the corrupt funeral home. Back to the travel saga. I forgot to tell you something very interesting happened while I was at the interview in Colorado during my travels looking for a job. This particular hospital turned out to be an HCA hospital. It was an HCA hospital in Las Vegas where I was told to do Medicare fraud and refused. I did not realize they were HCA at this hospital in Colorado until the interview. The director of OR interviewed me. Although I didn't get the job, I did find out some significant information. She was looking over my resume and asked me if I knew they too were an HCA hospital. This was quite a surprise to me, and I told her I was unaware of that. I told her the truth about what was happening in Las Vegas HCA hospital. She was quite surprised that the lunatic director of the OR, my terminology for her, in Las Vegas, had anyone's password. She told me she didn't have access to any other employees' passwords. She sounded genuinely concerned, and I liked her. In Las Vegas, every year we had to do a code of conduct training class because the hospital system had stolen millions from Medicare. That was the deal the corporation made with the federal government after they got caught. Instead of throwing the creeps in prison, they got a slap on their wrists and decided to pin down the employees with a mandatory code of classes. So I'm going to end here. My throat's getting a little dry now. I'm on page 30. We've got only 7 pages more to go, but I'm a little bit done right now. So I hope everybody enjoyed part 3 of Karen Romero, Goodness 8's testimony. Karen was a registered nurse, targeted woman. You can hear from her testimony that she has had a very difficult life. Her father had a difficult life. And after her divorce, it just got really bad for her. So leave your comments down below. I look forward to them. And remember to hit the thumbs up. Helps the channel grow. And feel free to share this widely.